But you know, knowledge is a very dangerous thing when you're trying to hold people down into a mind prison. You're trying to manipulate them. You're trying to control them. And so people like Credo Mutwa, who have the knowledge to rewrite history and therefore rewrite the present, they are very dangerous people to those that wish to control and suppress. Because this is the knowledge that only initiates normally get. But as Credo says, the world needs to know this.
They operate in what I call the gray area of human existence, that side of our lives which we don't want to acknowledge the existence of. We are told that the Chitauri eat energy which is generated when hundreds of human minds or one human mind starts thinking at certain levels. These creatures are harvesting us.
In other words, a reptilian extraterrestrial race has been controlling planet Earth for thousands of years to this day and putting its genetic compatible bloodlines into the positions of power.
For centuries, we've been told an official story about the origin of humankind, about religions, and about the civilizations that built our world. But far from the history books, in the spiritual heart of Africa, there are accounts that were never written down. Stories passed on in secret, generation after generation, by word of mouth. Stories that speak of beings who descended from the sky, of entities that altered human consciousness, and of guardians of knowledge who, in silence, preserved truths the modern world refuses to accept. One of those guardians was Credo Mutwa, a Zulu shaman who dared to break the silence, an elder who claimed to have seen with his own eyes the gods that rule this world from the shadows. This is his story, and what you're about to hear may forever change the way you see reality. Who was Credo Mutwa? Credo Vusamazulu Mutwa was born in 1921 in a South African village. His full name means the one who awakens the people. But his story cannot be told like that of an ordinary man, because Credo Mutwa was not an academic nor a scientist recognized by Western institutions. He was something far more powerful and at the same time far more feared. A Sanusi, an African shaman, a guardian of the most ancient secrets of the continent. In Africa, for millennia, knowledge was not written in books. It was passed down orally, through elders, healers, sages. It was sacred knowledge, protected, and only given to those who were ready to receive it. From a very young age, Credo was initiated into that lineage. It was his grandfather, also a healer, who instructed him in the mysteries of the body, the soul, and the universe. He learned about rituals, symbols, plants, spirits, but also about the gods who came from the stars long before today's religions ruled the world. Years later, with a firm and fearless voice, he decided to break the vow of silence and reveal to the world what he had learned. The Chitauri, the sky gods who altered the human being. Among all the knowledge that Credo Mutwa received from the elders of his lineage, there was one he could never forget. A story as strange as it was disturbing, but also, in many ways, too consistent with what many cultures around the world have whispered in hushed voices for centuries. That story spoke of the Chitauri, reptilian entities who, in ancient times, descended from the sky in shining ships, wrapped in fire and thunder. According to what was passed on to Mutwa, before their arrival, humanity was completely different from what we know today. Human beings were not divided into men and women. They were complete entities, self-sufficient, integrated in body, mind, and energy. They didn't use words either. They communicated directly through the mind by means of images, sensations, and pure thoughts. There was harmony, because there was no separation, and the human being lived in communion with the earth and the cosmos. But when the Chitauri arrived, everything changed. They divided the human into two sexes. They separated them, and with that introduced need, desire, dependence. They sowed duality. They also gave them spoken language, and although it may seem like a gift, Mutwa described it as one of the most effective tools of control, because by using words instead of thoughts, the direct connection was broken. Misunderstandings, lies, and confusion arose. Conflict settled in, and the most disturbing part, they put them to work in mines. According to these traditions, humans were forced to extract minerals for the gods, a detail that inevitably recalls the theories about the Anunnaki, such as those proposed by Zecharia Sitchin, in which an extraterrestrial race would have created or genetically manipulated the human being to serve as labor. This part of the story also resonates with the biblical account of the Tower of Babel, where it is said that men, being united by one language, tried to reach the sky, and that God, as punishment, divided them by languages so they could no longer understand each other. But what if that story wasn't about a divine punishment, but about a very real external manipulation? For Mutwa, the Chitauri were not myths or archetypes, but real entities with advanced technology and a clear purpose, to enslave human consciousness. They taught them to obey, to kneel, to accept imposed authorities. They introduced religions, kings, symbols of power, hierarchical structures. All of this to break the spiritual connection of the human being with their true essence. Since then, Mutwa warned, humans live under a spell, a mental enchantment that keeps them divided, confused, asleep, and disconnected from their true power. But there was something even more disturbing. Mutwa recounted that in one of his trances, or perhaps abductions, he was able to see how these entities fed on the human brain. Perhaps not only in a literal way, but also energetically. They nourished themselves on emotions, on fear, suffering, and chaos. Here, echoes appear from other stories. The archons of Gnosticism, who seek to keep souls trapped in the dense planes of matter, or the concept of loosh, proposed by Robert Monroe, an emotional energy that certain entities harvest from humans as if it were a crop. But the most unsettling thing, said Mutwa, is that the Chitauri never left. They continue to operate from invisible planes, camouflaged behind power structures, political systems, religious institutions, and sophisticated mechanisms of emotional and mental control. We will go deeper into this aspect later. Echoes of Africa, the legacy of the Dogon. But the story Credo Mutwa told us is not the only one in Africa, nor in the world. More than 5,000 kilometers from South Africa, in a remote region of Mali, lives one of the most mysterious and enigmatic cultures in the world, the Dogon. For generations, these people have safeguarded a knowledge that seems to defy all logic, and that, curiously, resonates with many of the stories Mutwa shared. The Dogon possess ancestral myths about beings who came from the sky, originating from the star system of Sirius. The most puzzling aspect is that even before modern science confirmed the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the human eye, the Dogon were already speaking about it and describing it with precision. They said their teachers came from the water and depicted them as amphibious beings with scales who descended from the sky in a rotating arc. Their purpose: to teach, guide, and sow knowledge on Earth. According to them, these beings not only taught astronomy, but also medicine, agriculture, and spirituality. How is it possible that an apparently isolated tribe had access to such precise astronomical information without telescopes or technology. And why do their stories match those of other ancient cultures around the planet? And even with what Credo Mutwa said about the Chitauri, is it possible that different peoples around the world, with no apparent connection, are remembering fragments of the same forgotten story? A global pattern they try to erase. We might think that what Credo Mutwa recounts is nothing more than the particular worldview of an African shaman. However, when one begins to look at the ancient stories of other civilizations, one discovers a disturbing pattern. The story of a humanity intervened, manipulated, disconnected from its true essence. The Dogon, like the Zulu, speak of beings who came from the stars, bearers of knowledge, but also of imposition. In America, the Hopi tell the story of the Kachinas, celestial entities who guided the first humans, but who also left warnings about cycles of destruction and corruption if humanity strayed from its spiritual path. In ancient Sumer, the Anunnaki were described as gods who created humans in their image and likeness, not out of compassion, but to use them as a labor force, as a servile race. Even in the biblical texts, if we read them from another perspective, we find traces of this intervention. The God who punishes, who imposes, who separates, who demands blind obedience. David Icke, one of the most controversial yet persistent authors in this line of thought, draws from many of these traditions and arrives at a radical conclusion. These entities never left. They weren't just figures of the distant past, but in his view, they continue to act today, operating from the shadows, maintaining control through political, religious, and technological structures. And it is here where Mutwa's story, instead of sounding like a legend, begins to seem like a warning, or even a clue to a much larger puzzle. The hidden bloodlines and the new mechanisms of control. According to David Icke, these beings or entities that were once worshipped as gods in ancient times never disappeared. Instead, they camouflaged themselves in new forms. Dynasties, royal bloodlines, power structures that have endured for centuries. Throughout history, many royal and aristocratic houses have claimed the so-called blue blood, a purity of lineage that, for Icke, is not merely symbolic. He argues that many of these elites descend from those very same beings who once intervened in humanity, and that, generation after generation, they have maintained their power through manipulation, secrecy, and social engineering. How do they operate today? Not with spears or divine lightning, but with orchestrated wars, induced economic crises, waves of insecurity, collective fears, and above all, constant division. When people are fragmented, polarized, when they live in fear or despair, they fall into low-vibration emotional states, rage, anguish, guilt, apathy, and from there, they are much easier to manipulate. In the past, this was done through imposed religions or ideologies. Then came the great instrument of 20th century control, mass media, which fixed a narrative, an official version of the world, and installed fear as a form of invisible governance. But the most effective tool came later, social media. With it, they no longer need to watch us directly. We ourselves voluntarily hand over our data, our emotions, our thoughts. And the worst part, they have fragmented our attention, polarized us into irreconcilable sides, and made us live permanently in survival mode. Instead of unity, collaboration, or spiritual awakening, what reigns is constant conflict, noise, distraction, and loneliness. This is how control is perpetuated, because when we are not at peace with ourselves or with others, when we are divided, exhausted, and disconnected from our essence, it is much easier to keep us asleep and manipulate us. But not all is lost. Even if this message may seem dark, if we know how to channel it, this information can become a true catapult toward a state of fulfillment, transcendence, toward true enlightenment, or gnosis. The purpose of this knowledge is not to fall into defeatism or become trapped in dark theories that only drag us down further. On the contrary, it is about understanding that we are immersed in a kind of video game, an informational hologram. And when we understand the nature of the screen we are playing on, we gain the power to transcend it. Perhaps we came here for a reason. Perhaps it was our own decision. And when this begins to resonate within us, something rises. Everything external loses weight. We begin to understand who we truly are and how we can free ourselves from those forces that drain our energy and keep us in ignorance. Only then do we begin to truly live, and even glimpse the possibility of transcending this screen and reaching the next level. The true rebellion is reunification. When we understand how these elites operate, and how they have operated since time immemorial, we begin to see the pattern. A pattern that repeats generation after generation, disguised under different names, colors, and flags. But the mechanism is always the same: divide, fragment, confront, confuse, weaken. And it is precisely by observing this pattern, by seeing their tricks clearly, that we begin to reclaim our true power. Because if all their effort is focused on separating us, distracting us, making us forget who we are, then the most revolutionary act, the true revelation, is to do exactly the opposite. It is to keep our attention strong, focused, sovereign. It is to choose, in a world of division, unity. Not just external unity, with others, with our loved ones, with those who walk our path, but also, and above all, internal unity. Because what they try to destroy is not only our bond with others, but with ourselves. To divide us from within. To separate our mind from our body. Our soul from our consciousness. Our energy from our intention. But when we reunify, when body, mind, soul, and spirit align once again, something changes. We return to what we once were: complete, conscious, free beings. And then we understand that the war was never about our jobs, nor our money. The war was always for our soul. And that is where our true power lies. Inside us. In that part no algorithm can reach, no empire can control. Our essence, our direct connection to the divine. Return to the center. Recover your energy. Faced with a system designed to scatter us, exhaust us, and keep us in survival mode, the true revolution begins with simple but powerful decisions. And one of the most important is to disconnect, to turn off, even for moments, that machinery that intoxicates us through algorithms designed not to inform us, but to fragment us, distract us, and take us away from our essence. Return to the natural, to a conscious, living diet that not only nourishes the body, but also calms the mind and elevates our vibration. Because what we eat directly influences how we think, how we feel, and how we relate to the world. But not only what we ingest through the mouth. Choose what we read, what we listen to, what we watch, where we place our attention. Choose what energies we surround ourselves with and what thoughts we empower. Because we are creators, and what we nourish within us blooms in our external world. Breathe. Something so basic, but that we have forgotten. Breathe deeply and with intention. Breathing, practiced and refined by wise yogis and meditators from the East for millennia, not only brings us to the present and silences the mental noise, it also unblocks our vital energy and allows prana, the force that animates all existence, to flow freely through our body and consciousness. Meditate, not as an escape, but as a return. Meditate to observe ourselves, to calm the whirlwind of external stimuli and reconnect with what we are beyond conditioning. Because in silence arises a clarity that is not born from thought, but from connection with our divine spark. Walk, exercise the body, dance, because the body is the temple where our consciousness dwells, and when we let it stagnate, our energy also stagnates. Conscious movement awakens and centers us. And although we hear about these habits again and again, nutrition, breathing, meditation, presence, it is not until we apply them consistently, day after day, that we begin to perceive their true power. It is not enough to know them, we must live them, because it is in constant practice that real transformation occurs. Go out into nature. Breathe fresh air, touch the earth, listen to the whisper of the wind and the song of the birds. There are no algorithms or masks there, only truth. And in that truth, something within us remembers who we are. Nature deprograms us, reorders us, returns us to the original pulse of life. And in those spaces of silence, of external disconnection and internal reconnection, we can finally observe ourselves. Ask ourselves honestly, from where am I acting? From my essence, my higher self, my spirit, or from an impulse programmed by fear, trauma, or habit? This self-observation is not always easy, especially when we live trapped in the whirlwind of daily life. But in the calm spaces we create, when meditating, breathing, walking in solitude, it becomes possible to weave again that subtle thread that connects us with the highest within us. And there begins true freedom when we stop reacting and begin to create from the spirit. Thus, step by step, we recover what they tried to take from us: sovereignty over our attention, the integrity of our being, and the sacred energy that dwells in us since the origin. Thank you very much for watching until the end. I hope this information was useful and enriching for you. See you soon.